Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine O'Day, the Executive Director at Save Our Shores, based in Santa Cruz, California. Our mission is to steward clean shores, healthy habitats, and living waters, and foster thriving marine ecosystems. We're delighted to have so many of you watch the inspiring documentary 2040, Join the Regeneration, and now to join us for a post-viewing discussion. We've got a great panel of speakers with us this afternoon, whom I'll introduce momentarily. But first, I want to make a very important acknowledgement. Today, we are on the unceded territory of the Yupi, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Awaswas-speaking Ohlone people. The land continues to be of great importance to the Amamutsan tribal band, the descendants of the indigenous peoples taken to missions Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista. We recognize every member of the Santa Cruz community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. Through this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous sovereignty and will hold ourselves accountable to the needs of American Indian and indigenous peoples. Thank you. So now it's my pleasure to briefly introduce our panel members. We have with us this afternoon Mayor Justin Cummings. Justin is the current mayor of the city of Santa Cruz and an environmental sensor technician operator. Previously, he was the founder of the UCSC Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program. We also have with us Mayor Rebecca Garcia. Rebecca is the current mayor of the city of Watsonville and has served on the city council there since 2014. For her advocacy on climate change, Rebecca received 2 Beacon Spotlight Awards at the League of Cities annual conference, one for greenhouse gas reduction and the other for energy savings. We also have Dr. Michael Mendez. Dr. Mendez is an assistant professor of environmental planning and policy at UC Irvine, and he was a gubernatorial appointee during the passage of California's internationally acclaimed climate change legislation. He has a new book called Climate Change from the Streets about how low-income and minority communities struggle to have a voice in shaping environmental policy. Joining us also will be Council Member Francisco Estrada. He let us know he might be a little bit late today, but Francisco joined the Watsonville City Council in 2018 and served as the mayor in 2019. He currently teaches history at Hartnell College and serves on the advisory board of Regeneración Pajaro Valley Climate Action. Francisco has also been involved in education, workforce innovation, and health equity in his native Pajaro Valley. Pamela Harkins brings her passion for environmental justice to her role as an English teacher at Pajaro Valley High School in Watsonville. She also advises La Vida Verde, a student-led club fighting the climate crisis through raising awareness and active solutions. Alexi Sedona is a member of the Amamutsan tribal band and seasonal program assistant for the Amamutsan Land Trust. He is currently a PhD student in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management at UC Berkeley. In the future, Alexi hopes to increase avenues for indigenous communities to be the leaders in environmental decision-making affecting their respective homelands. And Tiffany Wise-West is the Sustainability Climate Action Manager for the City of Santa Cruz. Tiffany is primarily responsible for the city's award-winning emissions mitigation and climate adaptation policies, projects, and programs. She has brought several hundred thousands of grant dollars to our community to develop climate and sustainable awareness tools and resources to implement mitigation solutions to ocean warming and sea level rise in our region. And Save Our Shores honored Tiffany as our Ocean Hero of the Year last year. So welcome, panelists, and let's have a really great discussion. And Gail, over over to you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone for being here today. If I could just remind our panelists to please go off mic and off camera to try to make the best of our bandwidth while we can between your speaking time. Oh, in front, Mayor Estrada, or former Mayor Estrada is here with us as well. That's exciting. So we're all here. I would like to begin by, Catherine already introduced, but by inviting Dr. Mendez, who's here with us from LA today, to share a glimpse of his new book, Climate Change from the Streets. I'm almost done reading the book, and I can tell I was very excited to read this book because I'm someone that cares a lot about our climate, and particularly our environmental justice and how the state of California is dealing with the climate here. So, and we hope that Dr. Mendez, you can share with us today a little bit of how the history of environmental justice movements forwarding California's world-renowned climate legislation can help illuminate local pathways to achieving solutions like those that we see in 2040, especially at a time when the movement for Black lives is leading so many to think deeply about racism, anti-racism, and how we see the world how seeing the world through new eyes can help to create a just, sustainable future. So welcome, Dr. Mendez.
Thank you, Gail. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me as well, Save Our Shores organization, for hosting this event and trying to get a little bit more awareness about climate action, and specifically how does climate action relate to low-income people of color, in particular individuals such as African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans that are at the front line of these climate impacts. And really putting that at the forefront. I know the last couple of weeks and months we've been hearing a lot about if we're environmentalists, about how is there a connection between climate justice, climate change, and understanding that you can't really have that climate change action and justice without addressing first racial justice. And for that matter, having an interdisciplinary and more importantly, an intersectional approach to understanding how different types of identities impact our positions in society and our disparate impacts from our changing environment. So let me share my screen with you very quickly. I'm going to be speaking some notes from an overview, more like it, from my new book that was just released earlier this month called Climate Change from the Streets, How Conflict and Collaboration Strengthen the Environmental Justice Movement. This is published by Yale University Press. And just to give you a little idea about the importance of this book, this is actually the first environmental justice book's monograph or sole topic of environmental justice that Yale University Press has ever published before. They've been publishing for 50 years on over 50 years that is, on environmental issues, and this is the first book that they actually focused on environmental justice. So I feel an importance to be able to put forward a little bit more about how I put low-income people of color and the achievements they have done, particularly here in California, as an example for other communities around the country and the globe. So to start with, this research really is about people, place, and power in the context of climate change and inequality. Although the science of climate change is clear, policy decisions about how to respond to its effects remain contentious. Even when such decisions claim to be guided by objective knowledge, they are made and implemented through political institutions and relationships and all the competing interests and power struggles that this implies. In my book, I present a narrative that describes the conflicts about climate change at its core as being cultural. California is often seen as a homogeneous entity that uniformly values environmentalism and climate action. This image universalizes the idea of climate change and detaches it from its cultural settings, specifically understanding how low-income people of color are impacted disproportionately from climate change. It also obscures how the localization of environmental policy and science within the state involves processes of public consultation and legitimacy. So this is to really say that while California is really seen as this entity that uniformly adopts climate change and it just like automatically happens, the reality here in California that there's really hard-won fights that low-income people of color from the Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, here in Los Angeles have really done to really focus away from abstract notions of the global environment to really understanding what does those impacts mean in local communities. Using the example of California, my book examines the culturally contingent nature of climate policy, the assumptions and worldviews that often create conflict between community understandings of local environmental conditions and the prevailing global regulatory culture of climate change. Again, this very top-down approach where we really think about the general mass of society, the general society, not really looking at the most vulnerable communities. And I argue that through a recurring process of conflict and collaboration, a broad range of individuals and organizations are co-producing what climate change and environmental justice means. It is undeniable that California's climate change programs are fostered by certain conditions of privilege, a robust economy, racial and economic plurality, and progressive statewide leaders. Nonetheless, they offer clear models of how to broaden climate change worldviews and imagine various relationships among the atmosphere, economic and racial disparities, and climate policy. By worldviews, I mean the social, political, and cultural attitudes towards the world that orient people's actions. Through an ethnographic policy analysis, I highlight how environmental activists, environmental justice activists in California have galvanized behind issues such as air pollution, poverty alleviation, and green jobs to advance equitable climate solutions at the local, state, and global level. So this worldview of attaching climate change, not just from the global perspective, but understanding that it doesn't happen in far off places in the natural environment, but climate change happens in our own backyards, particularly those communities at the front lines living next to oil refineries, power plants, cement factories, and how they're experiencing not just greenhouse gas emissions. I argue in a book away from what I call carbon reductionism. So carbon is the most prevalent greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. And oftentimes government policy, particularly California in the early years of its climate change policy, had really this reductionist focus, just focusing on carbon emissions, not really understanding that greenhouse gases, again, are coming from fossil fuel combustion, but at the same time, they're releasing carbon emissions, they're releasing local pollutants that stay at the local atmosphere that affect people's health. But our climate change policy in California, as the leader in climate change policy, wanted to separate from a global policy focused just on carbon reduction and having local reduction of pollution that causes our smog separately, and really bifurcating those systems. What environmental justice activists have really argued and fought for is linking local and global types of pollution to ensure that these people living next to, again, fossil fuel facilities are seeing the benefit of climate reduction strategies, and going away from this idea of what some of the activists that I have engaged with, both as an academic and in my many years working as a gubernatorial appointee and legislative consultant in Sacramento, really understanding that we can't have this form of what they call trickle-down environmental policy, having these global policies that benefit the general society, and hoping that it eventually trickles down to the people living next to these factories. So a lot of the I talk about is this conflict and really moving away from these siloed approaches and really these just global approaches that discounts people's own perspectives, their embodied perspectives of living next to these polluting facilities, and focusing on multi-benefit, multi-purpose policies, or what they call co-benefits, linking carbon pollution with local pollution that causes smogs to address social equity and public health. So this idea of broadening worldviews on climate change and having a more human health and community well-being perspective. Because these individuals, for them, climate change is not just, again, about these greenhouse gas models, rather it's also about opposing cultural values and worldviews to which that science around climate change is seen. For environmental justice activists, the main threat from climate change is the disproportionate harm that it causes to their health and their communities, including an increase in illnesses, injuries and deaths from extreme events such as hurricanes and wildfires, and a rise in respiratory diseases caused by degraded air quality that is further worsened by prolonged drought. For example, when activists sued the state of California for to block the cap-and-trade program, this is the centerpiece of California's climate change programs, and engaged in other oppositional tactics, it was not due to the lack of understanding about climate change science or policy solutions based on that science. Rather, activists relate to climate change based on their ideological preferences, personal experiences, and embodied knowledge. Hence, in California, tensions between climate change worldviews are often centered on the politics of scale, economic markets, and race. These differences in worldview, if unacknowledged, can lead to the breakdown of trust, even among groups that are nominally working towards the same goal, reducing the harm that climate change will do to human societies and our planet. Since 2002, this conflict and collaboration has yielded efforts to link economic opportunity and climate work in the state's most disadvantaged communities of color. This included pairing the state's climate mitigation goals to a series of environmental justice bills, which focus on transparency, accountability, public health, and equity in California's climate change policy implementation. One such bill, AB 197, requires that California's climate policy be implemented equitably with a focus on reducing local and global emissions in our most polluted communities. Another is AB 1550 and SB 535, which requires that as the state raises funds from its climate polluters, it invests a minimum of 35% of those dollars in projects benefiting California's disadvantaged and low-income communities of color. This has resulted in over $2 billion in investments in such communities. Most of the state's disadvantaged communities are mostly communities of color and the agricultural communities of San Joaquin Valley, the Central Coast of California, and industrial urban areas of Los Angeles and San Francisco. While the context and impacts encountered in these neighborhoods are different, they also share many similarities to the burdens residents in other parts of the country are facing. Places like West Virginia, rural Louisiana, and the Panhandle of Florida. The work in California illustrates that the inequities of climate change often overlap with the racial, economic, and historical inequities in American society. California's climate policy has created dozens of programs that focus on two key elements. Again, multi-purpose policies that reduce greenhouse gases and local pollution that often occur from the same processes of fossil fuel burning. And also the creation of green jobs in communities that need them most. By focusing on economic, public health, and racial justice outcomes, worldviews were able to change and gain some level of trust from legislators representing the state's conservative and rural areas. These provide important lessons to other regions, a need to focus on cultural meanings and values of climate change, and thereby providing outcomes and incentives that connect better to multiple worldviews. The case in California, moreover, is a historical reminder that major transformations in society did not happen all at once everywhere or without some form of conflict. Change is often created by a small group of passionate people whose experiments rupture existing practices. They make change from the streets and scale it up elsewhere. Successful experimentation with climate change solutions often begins through collaborative efforts at the state and local scale and focus on enacting achievable goals, for example, renewable energy projects. In this process, activist coalitions strengthen existing relationships with policymakers and develop new skills and knowledge as they do so. Such experimentation can be scaled up if others perceive their efforts as valuable. This recognition can transform the bonds of possibility, making ambitious and formally impractical ideas seem feasible. So in closing, through these new ways of thinking and doing, conflict between the economic, social, racial, and cultural dimensions of climate change can be resolved in practice. So thank you for this opportunity. That was just a small idea of talking about sort of the forms of justice that these activists, environmental justice activists have been engaging in California for nearly 20 years, since 2005, when California first started to engage around comprehensive climate change policies. So with that, I'd like to end my brief discussion and open it up to the next panelists. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Mendez. Thank you so much for that wonderful contextual opening to our conversation, helping us to place what we learned from the film 2020 within the context of our state of California and also the environmental justice movements that have had such great impact here. So going forward, I'd like to start, just to give everybody watching tonight an idea of what we're going to be doing here. I'm going to start by inviting each of our panelists to share a brief reflection on the film that allows them to also, since the film was made pre-COVID, what we're seeing with the movement for Black Lives right now, help to kind of bring what they saw from the film into context with what Dr. Mendez has just shared with us, and also with what's happening today around the globe, around our country, and in our county and in our region. So, and then after that, we will go into a few questions that we have pre-planned. And then we do have a few students here with us tonight. Some of Tammy's students from Pajaro Valley High School are here with us tonight, and we're going to invite each of them to just ask one question live on camera, and then we will be taking questions from our chat. I did see that we had at least one question come in for Dr. Mendez already, but we are going to hold those until after we've heard from our other panelists. So thank you again, Dr. Mendez. And I'd like to open the conversation by inviting Mayor Cummings from the city of Santa Cruz to come on camera and share his reflections on the film. Welcome, Mayor Cummings.
Thanks for having me today, and thanks for the invitation. I'm going to have to be honest that I got caught up in a lot of things with everything going on, from the social uprisings that we were seeing and COVID and 4th of July weekend, that I didn't get a chance to watch the film. But I do think that I can highlight just on this topic in terms of race and, you know, what does the future of our planet look like in terms of, you know, how we can be good stewards and how we can ensure a future for the next generation. And I can speak a little bit to some of the work that I've been doing for the past 4 years with the Dorsey Conservation Scholars Program. So this is a program that I was the founding director of it back in 2015. And the mission of this program specifically is to focus on increasing diversity in the field of environmental conservation. And so when we think about conservation and we think about many of the environmental fields, with the exception of environmental justice, is that we oftentimes don't see people of color represented in these organizations and institutions. Oftentimes we see boards and we see nonprofits and many organizations whose mission is to promote environmental conservation. We don't see people of color within those institutions, and even within the environmental conservation field. And so this program is intentional about trying to increase diversity in conservation. A big part of the program is that we recruit students who are early in the college career because students generally, when we think about the sciences and environmental sciences, a lot of students fall out in those early freshman and sophomore years. And so we really try to provide them with financial support, and we get them outdoors, and we connect them with professionals in the field so that they understand what kind of careers are available out there. And I think that as we continue to think about how, you know, what the future of conservation is going to look like and what the future of our environment and our planet is going to look like, we really need to ensure that communities of color are at the table, because oftentimes they're the ones who are most negatively impacted, and their voices need to be at the forefront of this conversation, especially since we know that the US demographic is going to be majority people of color within the next few decades. And so I think moving forward, we really need to be intentional about hiring. We need to be intentional about supporting people of color that are wanting to get into these fields around environmental protection. And then we need to look at our own institutions and our own organizations and ask ourselves the question, if there's a lack of diversity in our institutions, why is that so? And what can we do? And we need to ask ourselves what we can do to increase representation of all people within our organizations and in our institutions. And by doing so, ultimately, the goal is that we will be able to see a true reflection of the desire of communities of color, along with all other communities as it relates to environmental protection and the world we want to see moving forward. So, thanks.
Thank you so much, Mayor Cummings. And I have to say, it was great hearing about your experiences with the Doris Duke Scholar Program and also your thoughts on the importance of diversity and moving this conversation forward. And randomly, Mayor Cummings and I both went to the same school, Eastern Illinois University, as a matter of fact, quite random, but we're both here today. So thank you, Mayor Cummings. Next, I would like to introduce Mayor Rebecca Garcia from the city of Watsonville to share her reflection on the film. Welcome, Mayor Garcia.
Thank you for that welcome, and I am excited about being here for this conversation. What stood out for me in terms of the film is that all the issues addressed, for example, solar energy, farming, electrifying transportation, and others, they were all doable. It was just a matter of us making the decisions, we want to do this. So just like the results of the Black Lives Matters, actions now are going to take place to do what should have been done for racial justice in the past. So I am hopeful that with today's conversation, we'll begin in that journey in terms of doing what we must do to address climate change. One of the things that we really have to understand, though, is that in making changes, there has to be systems change. And systems change occurs through policy. And policy is made usually by elected officials. And a thing that Justin pointed out was in terms of those elected officials in institutions, how do we get more of them? Statewide, I don't know the exact numbers, but statewide, I know at least for city councils, when I've attended conferences, when I've attended summits, the majority of people are not people of color. And so what do we need to do to make sure that people of color are there to make the correct policy decisions regarding climate change? So that's an issue I think that's going to be on the table that all of us will have to address as we think of what we need to do for climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Garcia. And yes, thank you for following up in line with Mayor Cummings' thoughts as well about the importance of bringing people whose voices have been left out of the conversation and people who maybe are on the front lines with environmental justice and their own experiences to the table. So thank you so much for that. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Mendez back to share his reflections on the film.
Hi everyone. I enjoyed the comments from both of the mayors. That was quite insightful about the need for representation and demanding change in appointment of these important regulatory and lawmaking bodies. I think that was one of the key issues that happened in California is really having this inside-outside perspective in terms of organizing and advocacy, understanding it can't just be campaigning and protesting outside the halls of regulatory and legislative power, but also being able to be in those positions of power. And I just want to add to Mayor Cummings, I'm also one of the alumni from the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program up in Washington, the University of Washington. I was one of the instructors there for a few summers and continue to work closely with that organization. But to more specifically about the film 2040 really just provided a hopeful outlook about how can people from civil society, from nonprofit organizations, community-based groups be able to have a say and be aware about some of the issues that are impacting our communities. But I think most importantly, after watching it, it really showed the need to have more diverse voices within the film and within this general dialogue of mainstream, or what I often talk about, traditional environmentalism, such as Natural Resources Defense Council, as well as the Environmental Defense Fund, and a couple of major environmental organizations that ensure that we put people of color at the forefront. So I think that's the biggest takeaway I get in reflection from the film is the need for general education around these issues and to be active in these discussions, but also to bring in diverse voices in a substantive, powerful manner.
Thank you for that, Dr. Mendez. Next, I would like to introduce also from the city of Watsonville, Council Member Francisco Estrada. And Council Member Estrada is the immediate past mayor of Watsonville. So he has had the experience of being mayor as well. So, and he was elected at the same time as Mayor Cummings, I believe. So in that same election cycle. Welcome, Council Member Estrada.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Quick shout out to PV High. Always glad to see that our students are active and engaged in these important and difficult matters that we all have to work on. But the video was great. You know, my wife and I watched it, and before we even started watching, my wife was like, I don't know if I want to watch it. I don't know if I want to be depressed, but it was such a hopeful film, which is what I really appreciated. And as the Mayor Garcia had mentioned before, you know, these things are doable. And, you know, the solutions that it proposed, the ideas that it brought forward, gave you a sense of, you know, we can do this. I know that things are grim. I know that this is sort of an underdog story as well. You know, can we do it? Can we turn things around? I know the current administration at the federal level is not helping things, but despite that challenge and despite some of the things that are happening, you know, it gave you a sense that it is possible to do this. And it really hit home for me because my wife and I are expecting our first child in August, and we're having a daughter, you know, and the way that film ends really spoke to me. It was so simple yet so impactful, you know, that last solution. And you know, it really speaks to the fact that our greatest resource are people. You know, people are the most important resource that we have, and being able to elevate, especially, you know, as we've seen lately, Black lives. When you elevate Black lives, you elevate, you know, humanity. When you elevate female women voices, you elevate humanity. And when you do that with the LGBTQ plus community and with Native Americans and people of color and all peoples that have been systematically, you know, oppressed or have suffered under unjust systems, you really elevate humanity's capacity to solve anything. You know, we're the same race that made it to the moon. And so this film was just a remarkable, it was time well spent. I'm glad that I was able to watch it with my wife. And more than ever, you know, I'm very honored and grateful to be a girl dad. And I know I'm going to do my part to make sure that my daughter grows up to be whatever she wants to be, but to the benefit of her community and to all people. So great film. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Estrada, and thank you for sharing with us. Congratulations that you and your wife are expecting. And thank you for speaking from your heart on that too. I know that personally, I'm a mother. I have an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and really that's what drives me to be a climate activist, because I am very worried about their future. So thank you for sharing that. Next, I would like to welcome Pamela Harkins, who is a teacher at Pajaro Valley High School.
Well, Mayor Estrada, you're my hero, because I say the same thing. I went in going, oh no, another climate change film. I've been at this for 30 years, and 25 years ago, I had a little daughter, and I really got on board after that. And I just want to say, this film was exactly what Mayor Paco said, which is very uplifting, doable, even easier, I think, than going to the moon. It's about the will of the people. And my part as an educator for the last 30 years has been to both inspire kids and to be inspired by them. And the 2 kids I invited today, again, I'm just always renewed and regenerated. The swarming electrification of the video, of the piece that was in India, where people were sharing electricity and selling it in the poorest of probably all the hoods in the world, is a great example of what we can do with our own ideas metaphorically. We can swarm our power, we can share our power, we can, even if it's not waiting for policy or the Senate to change policy or, you know, this kind of stuff, because we're having a lot of fights right now locally about budgets, you know, should we fund the police, should we fund youth, should we fund, you know, all this stuff. And the truth is, we can get it going in schools. That's the keystone. And I have a school in New Mexico I'm so proud of. Just 3 years ago, we set up where kids were building tiny homes for the homeless that were off-grid. They were learning about green energy and climate change. They were helping with poverty. They were solving the polar bear thing, which is what Van Jones always says, poverty and polar bears have the same root solution. And they were learning math, which is not very easy these days. And I've been sitting here in summer school every day, and I'm like, if these kids could learn the quadratic equation by building a home for their families or for themselves, and on top of it have climate change. So this movie has multiple levels of solutions, just like the seaweed farms, which are brilliant, just like educating girls. They all pay off after a while. And I would like to pose to our current Mayor Garcia and also our Mayor of Santa Cruz and our past mayor, that we look at changing schools up. I mean, especially in the times of COVID, having taught in Oakland and actually been in the middle of a lot of police brutality cases, all of this stuff is coming together, the confluence of these things. And the youth are rising because, one, they've gotten the education. Two, they feel the injustice, all colors, which is what's so beautiful and multiracial about this movement. And three, COVID is a message to all of us about slowing down and also seeing how we can reconfigure this world and regenerate the world. And so this movie really just nails it when it comes to the ways in which we can solve multitudes of problems. We don't have to make that false dichotomy between environmental justice and social justice, because they're all solved. All boats rise, right, when we raise them all up. But certainly I love what Michael Mendez said about, you know, having the perspectives. All of us have green roots, certainly Native Americans, which I'm part of. And if we go back and look at our green roots, and, you know, all our kids at PV who don't realize that, oh my gosh, they're actually Native American, and so we're making a decolonized garden to get in touch with that. The more we bring joy and fun into education, the more we let them do projects that are real and value added in the community, the more we get programs where kids can actually create their own revenues, you know, start selling things at farmers markets, microgreens, create their own systems or aquaponic systems, what have you. The more we can actually solve so many things at once. And I certainly am so happy that you're going to have a little girl. I'm sorry, that sounds sexist, but Itzel Sanchez is one of my heroes right now, and I see so many amazing, beautiful women rising up in the world right now of all colors, and I'm so excited for the two of them to say something soon, or at least ask something soon. That's it. We got to swarm.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you so much for sharing both about how students have, you know, can play such a huge role in helping us to envision the future that they want to grow up into, and also how this film really does show that the things we need to do to improve our climate are the same things we need to do to improve the lives really of everyone on this planet. And so thank you for making that beautiful connection. Next, I would like to welcome Alexi Sedona, who is with us tonight, and he is a member of the Amamutsin tribal band. Welcome, Alexi.
Thank you, Gail. And thank you, Catherine, for the wonderful land acknowledgement. So I found the approach of the generational thinking to be very appealing in this film. Our elders always talk about making decisions for future generations, often more than one generation, and 2040 carries that mentality. And I also think we should think about our second, third, fourth generations. You know, a lot of Native communities think about thinking for the next 7 generations. And then I also like the idea of narratives that was seen in this film. I'm just creating this new story. It seemed that the filmmaker was urging us to create a new narrative for the future. But I think the director was not critical enough about who has been in control of the dominant historical narrative and who can participate in this new narrative for our collective future. I worry that Indigenous communities and people of color will continue to suffer from erasure if the true history of colonization is not properly addressed. To move forward, we must first heal from past traumas. Overall, the film seemed to do a good job in amplifying a diverse array of perspectives coming from children. But I want to make a point that it is crucial for those in power to acquire knowledge in a respectful manner. If conducted poorly, collaborations with marginalized communities can just be a continuation of colonization. If people go into these communities and only looking to extract knowledge, this is just another form of extraction that follows a legacy of resource extraction from indigenous lands. I think that if calls to action invoked by the film are done poorly, marginalized communities may not be stakeholders in shaping our future world. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Alexi. And I would like to welcome our I would like to welcome to share her reflections on the film, Dr. Tiffany Wise-West, who comes to us as the Sustainability and Climate Action Manager in the city of Santa Cruz. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. West.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Gail. So really echoing the previous panelists' comments, the one thing I really loved about this film is that it starts with the premise that we have all the technology and resources we need to make this carbon-free transition. That's something I always like to remind folks, since it really creates space for hope, which we really need to have. The film was also so inspiring and solutions focused, as has already been mentioned, and those were really both best practices for resonating with and activating the public. And that is so timely because, and the film is so timely, because the city of Santa Cruz is actually embarking upon its Climate Action Plan 2030 process starting in the fall. We're working right now on developing the scope of work from a wide, diverse range of stakeholder groups. And the film really is causing me to kind of rethink the entire visioning engagement part of that project. And as Alexi mentioned, really thinking about the generational equity. I think the film also really did the important task of linking climate change impacts and solutions with equity and public health. I think we all saw that. And we really are taking this cue in our Climate Action Plan 2030 process as well to ensure we're inclusively planning an equity-focused and community-driven approach. We also plan to explicitly focus on linking emissions mitigation, decarbonization with climate adaptation, with the green economy, and with climate and COVID recovery and regeneration. So themes that we saw in this film. Also, building on the work the city has completed through our Health and All Policies initiative, which Mayor Cummings was involved in over last year, which really focuses on sustainability, public health, and equity. Through that initiative and through the diverse relationships we've built through our adaptation work, I'm really excited to kind of take that to the next level. We are bringing on the Greenlining Institute from Oakland to guide us in our climate action plan's equity piece, in addition to, of course, our local partners. And I'm so eager to open conversations to learn more and more about how to effectively operationalize equity in our work to really ensure that we can work towards that just, diverse, and equitable representation as we plan our climate future. So thank you very much to Save Our Shores for this unique engagement opportunity and really for highlighting these important topics in this way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wise-West. And speaking of adaptation, I have just learned this film 2040, of course, is from Australia, and it's been out for about a year, I believe, and I've been following it and waiting to bring it, just having seen the trailer, because it looked so hopeful, and I was really looking for something hopeful like this. We are dealing, the filmmakers it's newly released in the United States, and they actually postponed their release because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so now they're dealing with trying to do their big national release with a bunch of these mini things going on. And so I just found out, unfortunately, that our live stream has a hard stop apparently at 4:05. And I know that we do have a few questions that have come in through the chat. So I'm going to ask the panelists if we can please shift our order just slightly and go ahead and ask the questions that have come in from the chat first, and Krista from Save Our Shores is going to come on with those, and then afterward we will go forward with our other kind of questions and the dialogue we had planned. And just for anyone that is watching in the live stream, we are recording all of this in Zoom, and we will certainly make it available to everyone, hopefully through the filmmakers after the fact. So you should hopefully be able to watch the entire meeting, but we do want to go ahead and try to get to some of your questions while you're still here with us. So Krista, would you like to ask one of the questions that has come in through our chat?
Yeah, thank you. So I had a really interesting question come in through the chat that is directed to our previous and current mayors in Santa Cruz County, as well as Tiffany. And the question is, do you know of any blue carbon work that is being done in Santa Cruz County, such as seagrass habitat restoration, marine permaculture, or any others? So any of our mayors or Tiffany would like to take that question? Looks like Tiffany, go ahead.
I'm happy to chime in a little bit on this. So in Santa Cruz County, there is some climate adaptation living shorelines work that's happening. There is also some aquaculture that's happening out of UC Santa Cruz. That's Dr. Ann Kapuscinski from the new UCSC Coastal Science and Policy Graduate Program. I collaborate quite a bit with her, actually. And then I know also that the Middlebury Institute, I was involved I have been involved in this, is developing a Blue New Deal. So an ocean New Deal, basically. And so that's also, many of the blue carbon topics are taken up in that work. And so if you're in the area and local, I encourage you, Dr. Jason Scores from the Middlebury Institute is leading that effort. So that's what I have for feedback on that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. I have another question. What solutions do the panelists see in play or potential play right now for our community that concurrently addresses racial justice and climate? And how can we support realization of those solutions?
I guess I can start off first. I think the biggest idea leading with this idea of who's the most impacted from climate change impacts, who's suffering the most from pollution, both from the local and that global pollution I mentioned about earlier. And going with that first, and as we see that overlay with our social inequities, our racial inequities, particularly on society. And one approach is targeting our proposal to that. And I think just last week, the California Air Resources Board is the first in the country to adopt a standard, a mandate that is for electrification of our heavy duty trucks. 75% of particulate matter comes from diesel fuel combustion, and that primarily affects low-income communities of color. So that's a major advantage. It's targeting those policies towards pollution and public health, as well as trying to protect our global environment through climate change initiatives. I think that's one key issue that had just happened last week, and many of the environmental justice organizations have been fighting for that over the last couple of decades to have a stricter regulation of from our logistics and transportation sector. So that's just one example of always leading first, of putting our policies, making sure our policies are efficient, are more efficient in terms of targeting the most impacted.
Thank you for that, Dr. Oh, were you planning to answer as well, Mayor Cummings?
Yeah, I was just going to provide a quick answer to that. And I think Tiffany touched on it a little bit when she was discussing the 2030 climate action plan. But one of the things we're really trying to emphasize is getting those, the diversity of voices in on these conversations as they relate to policy decision making. One of the things here in Santa Cruz that we know of is that the Beach Flats community, which is predominantly Latino, that is one of the communities that's going to be the most impacted, and it's one of the lowest income communities in Santa Cruz. And so as far as policymaking, we're really trying to include their voices in these conversations to understand what kind of mitigation strategies we're going to need to do to help those communities. And then in addition to that, we've been moving forward with building electrification here in Santa Cruz, so moving away from the use of natural gas in newly constructed buildings. So those are just a few of the things that we're doing here in Santa Cruz to address this issue of racial equity and climate protection.
Thank you, Mayor Cummings. So with that, I think we're going to go resume our order, and I was going to ask Alexi if he could come back on and just share a little bit to bring us back into the film. The subtitle of the documentary 2040 is Join the Regeneration. And we're wondering, does that concept, regeneration, ring true to you as an Indigenous person? And with the traditions of your tribal brand and also your Roots and Routes organization that you shared about in your bio? Alexi?
Yeah, thank you, Gail. I think regeneration is a pretty fitting word. So a definition I found online for regeneration was to create again, right? And if we think about this in regard to climate change, we're hoping to create an alternative way of living in this world. But I think one important component of this is to look back and learn from past mistakes and failures, right? So it's not creating something entirely new. So my community is working to restore our traditional practices, which allowed us to live in harmony with our traditional territory. Our community lived in our traditional territory for tens of thousands of years and had this way of stewarding the land where it was a sustainable method and we could live there in abundance with all of our other plant and human relatives. And Indigenous peoples have unique knowledge systems and relationships with their lands that can help us all. One thing to point out is that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People mandates that all Indigenous peoples must have free, prior, and informed consent during development or use of ancestral lands, right? So really incorporating Indigenous peoples in this conversation of regeneration is really important. One example where environmentalism might butt up against this principle is in Norway, where Sami reindeer herders are being affected by wind turbine developments on their ancestral lands. So you kind of have this play of who to listen to and the voices that are heard in creating a better future. And also, if we wish to regenerate, we might need to analyze capitalism and question its role in building a better world. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Alexi. Just if you want to close the comment a little bit, do you have any thoughts on how we as humans went from being caretakers of this beautiful planet to being dominators of nature? I know you just mentioned capitalism. Any thoughts on how we can change this story coming from your perspective?
Thank you, Gail. Yeah, thank you for allowing me to share on this. Well, I think the mentality of dominance is the root cause of environmental degradation, like you kind of alluded to, but it's also the root cause of colonialism. So the domination of our environment started with the domination of Indigenous peoples. Now, I do not think all people played an equal role in creating the world we live in today and the issue that we have today. But Indigenous peoples are more greatly affected by the issues related to climate change. Dr. Mendez kind of pointed that out earlier too. Climate change adaptation could easily perpetuate colonial relationships by failing to acknowledge the sovereignty of Indigenous nations. And some things that I saw in this film that made me question the ability to kind of like stop or change our diets and stuff was thinking about people like the Boreal people or the Maasai who are pastoralists, whose ceremonial uses of cattle are so important to their well-being, and my tribe has had ceremonies for the salmon that relied on salmon to sustain us. In order to stop dominating our environment, we also have to stop dominating Indigenous culture, I believe. My community was and continues to be stewards of our traditional territory. And to change from the story of dominance, we need to tell the true history of colonization and genocide, which was kind of at the root of this environmental degradation. We also need to ensure that Indigenous peoples and peoples of color are leaders in restoring better relationships with the environment and better relationships with each other.
Thank you so much, Alexi. And I would like to mention, we do have a couple of Tammy students waiting in the wings with us. We were hoping to sort of get through a little bit of the planned discussion that we have here and then invite them on. But I did want to mention that they, Itzal and Luke, have both been part of a club working at Pajaro Valley High School, which is actually planting a decolonization garden as one of their main projects. And so we may not have time just quite yet, but we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that when they do join us shortly. Tammy, you're up next. How concerned and do you think, and a couple of your students are here with us as well, your students are about the climate crisis and the impact on their future. And we're also wondering how you talk with your students about the disproportional impacts of COVID, industrial agriculture, and the social and financial inequity that they see in their community, in our region. So welcome, Tammy and Itzel and Luke.
Well, you can ask them how I think there's a lot of gloom and doom. I'm not supposed to make the children cry, but we do gloom and doom for a while, and then we look at solutions, fun solutions. Itzel will agree with me that probably kids don't get connected or concerned unless they're actually connected to nature. And we definitely have the nature deficit disorder going on. I don't know why we spend more time in the classroom now that we're looking at outdoor classrooms for COVID return. And we need to be taking them out into the wilderness or to their communities and seeing the beauty that's there. But we also, from our farm worker community, can be looking at very specific things. I don't see why we can't just take all schools and turn them into community health and studies programs where kids get to go out, study the issues, come up with solutions. It's like we teach all about the garden and then they never get to go out into the garden. We teach about the tools, they never get to actually use the tools. So school is still in this colonized, simulated thing right now. It's kind of stuck that way. There's a few schools here and there that are doing it, and we should look at those models the way we looked at 2040. They're amazing what some of these schools do. The Bali school in Indonesia is amazing. The kids actually just learn everything about community health, and they live it at their schools. They create it in their communities. Our kids really need to do that. They need to get out, and I'm sure Itzel and Luke would agree with me. They're bored to death, or they're tired, or they're sick of hearing about problems and feeling powerless. And so certainly getting them involved. I mean, even just our little rally we had last year and speeches and having real audiences and real world hands-on solutions that they're part of is important. They have to be so included in the conversation. And certainly communities of color, I've taken kids to Hunters Point when I was in Oakland to just check out the literacy for environmental justice projects there, taking brown lots and turning them into things. We're doing a pesticide drift program next year with a lot of great local agencies where we're looking at, the issues of that. It's a local radicalism that needs to happen. Adam Werbach talked about this when he was the youngest Sierra Club president. Local radicalism is a way in which we can do it, where kids can really just get involved and not just see it from, the classroom or a project that they put on a poster or even a film or a video. They can make their own films and videos about solutions and change. And that is where things start to shift and they get positive and they get a real sense of, hope, which is what we need right now, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Tammy. And we do look forward to hearing from both Itzel and Luke with some questions a little bit later on. I have had the pleasure of hearing both of them speak, and they are powerful. And I personally am most hopeful about our future because of the young people that are coming up and speaking for their own futures. It's just a beautiful thing to see. So Dr. Mendez, I'd like to invite you back briefly to touch on Kate Raworth, the economist in the film. She talks about her theory of donut economics, and Paul Harkins, of course, has his drawdown thinking. Wondering about your understanding, how you might connect those, one or both of their thinking to your understanding of the need to connect global climate solutions to our local needs. And you did cover a lot of that in your introduction. But if there's anything more on that you'd like to share.
Sure, yeah. I think the example of the Drawdown, which book has been a very popular, and it's a great guide for individuals wanting to have sort of a blueprint of how to engage in the most scientifically or economically sound climate action strategies at multiple scales, at the local, regional, and statewide or national level. So I think that's a great part. But then we oftentimes what happens is we get so focused on the technology, like sort of a technological fetishism, or what they call in academia technological determinism, and really thinking that this is going to solve all our problems. And we really understand that the comprehensive change that we need doesn't only require novel and new type of technologies, but we do have the existing technologies to do systematic change. So I think it's a great starting point to have those, but also to understand that what's holding us really back from climate change is it's political and a cultural issue. And as we, even in places like California, where we do believe in science about, at least our politicians at the state level, more than 2/3 of them believe in support climate change problems. Even within, you can get lost with the issue of equity, and then more focused on these technological issues and economic issues at the expense of equity. So while some of these issues may be scientifically and economically sound, from the policy perspective, they're inefficient because they're not targeted oftentimes to those communities at the front line. So just again, in closing, is that we can't just romanticize these technologies with understanding about the implications of these technologies and where we should be targeting our overarching comprehensive policies to first.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Mendez. So moving on, I would like to welcome Mayor Garcia and also Councilmember Estrada to talk a little bit about how we might transform our regional agriculture. I mean, Watsonville agriculture is a big part of your local community. How might we transform our regional agriculture, opening more opportunities for small farmers who want to be part of the solution rather than the problem, as we saw in the film?
I don't know how many small farmers we have in Watsonville, but I suspect that there are more of them than there are large corporations. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the city has been able to reach out to farmers through the Ag Commissioner and through the Farm Bureau. We have given educational health guidance and resources to farmers to educate and protect our farm workers. This new relationship can serve as a basis to begin conversing about climate change with the farming community. In 2015, the city of Watsonville adopted a climate action plan. We had short-term and long-term goals. In the short term, we were able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and conserve energy. Now in year 5, 2020, we are now updating and revising our plan. It will now be a climate action and adaptation plan. The adaptation will include examining additional risks such as the agricultural industry impact on our community and climate change. The process for developing the new plan will include stakeholders and community engagement. And of course, agriculture must be one of those stakeholders that needs to be involved in the development of this new plan. I would suspect that what will happen is that farmers will first have to understand that their farming can help with climate change by reducing and sequestering carbon. They might not know that that can happen through their farming. Then they would have to learn all the techniques and strategies to do that. And I know the city will work with the agriculture industry to support the process of contributing to the solution instead of the problem. And so we do look forward to working in a different manner with our agriculture industry than we have before. So Francisco, I don't know if you want to add.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your speaking about our large farming community. We have some of the most important enterprises and businesses here throughout, considered as, throughout the world. And so I would want to kind of switch it up a little bit. I know that sometimes some of the problems that we've had or has gotten us into these problems is, having this top-down sort of model of power sharing. And I do want to just mention my work with Regeneración and with another organization that I really do admire, Mesa Verde Gardens. And the reason that I support both organizations and I serve on the Regeneración as an advisory board member is because of their, bottom-up approach to climate change. And I appreciate that Nancy Folstich has done such an amazing job to bring in, as we've all mentioned already, the voices of those that need to be heard the most, the ones that are affected the most by climate change and the ones that are the least responsible for its accelerated growth. And so, the one thing that Nancy and Regeneración discovered through community surveys is that the farm workers are obviously the most impacted by climate change because of the hotter days, the longer days, heat stroke. It's just they really do take the brunt of climate change. And so the fact that she has gone above and beyond to really bring in those voices, I think, is a remarkable thing. And because of that, because of her efforts, because of the support that she has from the board, Nancy has rightly so gained a seat at the table. And I know that when our climate action plan comes up in a few weeks, we will listen to her because she has listened to the community. And then the other thing that I love about Mesa Verde Gardens, if you're not familiar with it, they've just recently become a program of the Pájaro Valley Community Health Trust, but they offer small plots of lands to people who come from a Latin American culture where planting and gardening and growing your own food was normal, was not out of the ordinary. And through their little plots of lands, they build community. They're with their families. They're eating a lot healthier. They have access to healthier food. And the other aspect that I love is sort of the transformation that they make these passive residents into active community members, where they come together. They have their asambleas where they talk about some really high level stuff. I think perception isn't always correct, and you would think that maybe the average farm worker doesn't have an opinion about some of these really important world events and trends and historical systems that dominate our lives, but they really. And when you give them the opportunity to speak up, to inform themselves, to come to consensus, it's a really empowering thing to experience and to watch. And so my hat's off to both Mesa Verde and to Regeneración Pájaro Valley, because they're really building that work, like I said, one person at a time, starting from the bottom, from the roots, and then growing it all the way up, and to where hopefully, as the mayor said, Mayor Garcia, it reaches us and we sort of just make the easy, it's easy for us. We just vote yes on these amazing and great ideas that come from community.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Estrada, and thank you for calling out Regeneración as well. I do see that Nancy, the founder of that wonderful organization, is here with us tonight, as well as Kirsten Liskey, who I believe is one of their board members, along with Councilmember Estrada, and I believe that Mayor Garcia is a past board member to that, or a founding board member, I think, to that wonderful organization. So yes, thank you so much for mentioning them. We are going to take just one more sort of pre-planned question right now to Mayor Cummings and Dr. Wise West, and then we are going to invite Itzel and Luke, who have been with us and waiting patiently to share the questions that they have brought to us tonight. So Mayor Cummings and Dr. Wise West, how does the shared autonomous car and electrified public transport vision in the film relate to the city of Santa Cruz's recent parking related controversies?
I was going to say it's probably better to have Mayor Cummings answer this, because I think you must be referring to our library and the associated parking garage as the controversy. And I know that the mayor has been on that committee. So I'll just say that transit-oriented development, dense infill development, is consistent, with our general plan and is a specific best practice in the space. So I'll let Mayor Cummings talk about this also.
Great, thanks. So, as we think about having a greener community and planet, and we think about transit, one of the things that we have to consider is that transportation is going to be something that's going to change in a lot of ways that currently are, somewhat unpredictable, right? We are looking to have more mass transit. However, in the wake of COVID-19, given that we don't know how long this is going to last and this is going to change people's behavior for very long periods of time, do we see people really gravitating towards mass transit after COVID-19? And so that's a question for consideration, because we do want to make sure that our mass transit is green as possible, and that it's electric. But we also have to understand that one thing that in particular is very common within American culture is the use of cars, right? And while we want to get away from the fossil fuel use and carbon emissions that come from cars, a question becomes, are people going to be willing to completely divorce themselves from cars, even though they'll have electric options, right? So I would say that in the next, over the long period of time, I think we really want to get people away from cars. But given that we're going to have electric options that are cleaner options, we also have to think about that as well. And then as it relates to these, independent forms of transportation or I'm not sure the best way to put it, but driverless vehicles, that's another factor for consideration as well. And we understand that technology is being developed right now. But even if we get that technology to a point where we can have less cars on our road, the question then becomes, where are those vehicles stored, and where are they going to charge? And so right now we are in a position where we're going to see a lot of parking lots come offline. And given that there are a lot of different interests around the recent around our new library, the need for housing, there's a need for parking within our city. We really tried working to figure out what was going to be the best compromise that we could all move forward with, and that is a lot of what informed the new mixed development project. And so, in addition to that as well, one of the things we wanted to ensure with the design of that project was that we didn't have the parking embedded within the structure of the library, so that if over time we do see this reduction in cars and it gets to a point where we don't need to have parking anymore, this is a separate building that can be torn down and repurposed for potentially more housing. So I think that we have to be realistic in terms of our timelines and what we're expecting and anticipating to happen in terms of people's behaviors, and really plan for a variety of different options as we're moving forward. But I would just say that, I really hope that we can get to a point where, we get fossil fuels out of cars and out of the automobile industry. We move towards more electric vehicles, that over time we start adopting more forms of mass transit, and we really try to have the biggest impact on reducing our carbon emissions as possible.
Thank you, Mayor Cummings. And I would just like to take a minute to offer a huge thanks, token of gratitude to Mayor Cummings, to Mayor Garcia, and also to Councilmember Estrada. Just recognizing that I think this is probably maybe one of, if not the most difficult time to probably be an elected leader right now, with the challenges that we're facing, between our climate crisis, our biodiversity crisis, the COVID epidemic, and what we're now, this new realization about what's happening with the racism of our country. There's pretty much so much that needs to change. And thank you all for your service, because I know this is a very difficult time to be leading. And also thank you to Tammy, because I know that this is an incredibly difficult time to be teaching. And that's going to bring us, I'd like to invite Itzel and Luke, and also recognize that this is a very difficult time to be a student. I mean, really everything at this moment is changing. So Itzel, Luke, if you would like to come on and ask a question, each of you. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Mi primera y principal pregunta sería sobre el tema de la enseñanza sobre este tema, siendo todo lo de cambio climático, ya como la posibilidad de que enseñaran más sobre este tema en las clases, porque siento como que no escuchamos mucho de ese tema, Entonces, como que los estudiantes no están muy educados y también por eso no le toman tanta importancia. ¿Lo podrías traducir eso?
You're kind of like glitching up, so I didn't get to hear a lot of it. The quality, it wasn't very good.
Que, okay. Que si estarían como dispuestos
Hey,
a
Itzel, maybe turn off your video
enseñar
and just go with your voice. There you go.
si estarían dispuestos a enseñar más sobre el tema del cambio climático en las escuelas.
So she's proposing that we have, climate change and climate injustice talked about more in schools because it's not talked about as much as it should be.
Are we asking Tammy or Mayor Garcia? Who would you like to hear from, Itza?
Sería más a Mayor Garcia.
Mayor Garcia, do you have, I know that you also have many years of education experience.
As I heard that question, the immediate thought I had was when I was a teacher at Watsonville High School, I wanted the students to learn at that time, the big thing was the racism that was occurring in Africa. And now I can't even remember what the term that was used at that time. But nonetheless, and that was a real difficult concept to teach. And so what I did is I read them a story. And the story was actually about, I think it was two gophers who lived underground. And so they were very limited in what they could do in their lives. And from reading that story, then they were more able to understand that concept of racism in Africa. And so I'm thinking in terms of climate change, one of the ways that students can have a better understanding about climate change is through literature. And so, yes, I think whether you're teaching math or English or social studies or whatever, there's always literature that can be used through that particular topic of learning to help understand climate change. And so, yes, I agree, we need to teach it more, but teach it in different methods, different manners, so that it can be better understood by youth.
Thank you, Mayor Garcia. And yeah, as a former literature teacher myself, that's actually one of the things I love about this story, because I think that telling things through stories is so important, and literature is so important in terms of helping us to develop empathy and have a sense of what people's lives are like, who are living very different lives from our own. So thank you for that. Luke, did you have a question as well?
I did have a question for Ms. Garcia. I just want to know, what's your thought process on directing more funds to green jobs training programs?
The thing is, as you must understand, the city deals with city issues, and careers and jobs is a city issue. However, what has not happened with our particular city council is to have a bigger picture of all the other things we need to support, because quite frankly, we have limited amount of funding, and that limited amount of funding goes basically to help the operations of a city, such as potholes in streets, picking up the trash, planting more trees, and many things such as that. So unfortunately, the city does not have that concept of what you're proposing. But what I would suggest is for you to officially write the mayor, me, and I don't know in which district you live. Do you know in which district you live?
Paro Valley. I go.
No, the district, the city is divided into 7 districts. And in each district, so first tell me what your address is. What's your street name?
Kingfisher.
Oh, I don't know what Kingfisher. Tell me where Kingfisher is.
It's right in front of Landmark Elementary.
Oh, so I think you might be in either Felipe's district or Paco or Francisco's district. So in addition to writing to me, I would say write to one of your city council representatives and make a proposal to us. And we'll take that proposal and see what we can do.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Garcia, and thank you, Luke and Itzel, for bringing those really important questions and for bringing your voices into this conversation. I do have one last question that I would like to direct toward Dr. Wise West, but we are running close to 5:30, and I did want to just ask if any of our panelists need to jump right at 5:30, because we were hoping to do a series of sort of closing thoughts. Is there anyone, I'm wondering if people can stay till potentially 5:45, or is there anyone that needs to jump off at 5:30? Anyone? If
I could stay longer.
Wonderful. If I don't hear from somebody or anyone else, I'm going to assume that we're good staying potentially till 5:45. And if so, thank you so much for all of the time you're taking with us tonight. So just one last question. Dr. Wise West is Sustainability Director for the City of Santa Cruz, but she also works with our Central Coast Climate Coalition. She, I believe, is a founder of that group. And so this is really a regional question. Dr. Wise West, I live in the mountains, and having seen the bushfires from Australia recently, and just thinking about what happened in 2018, in Paradise, I'm really afraid of wildfires. And looking to the film, their example that they gave from Bangladesh of that solar microgrid, like that has me fired up, both from a safety standpoint, from an economy standpoint, from a building our local resilience standpoint. And I'm wondering if there's any chance that we could do something like that to actually replace our PG&E grid, because I'm honestly pretty afraid of our PG&E grid.
Well, that's a great question, a very timely question. One thing I just want to mention is the organization is the Central Coast Climate Collaborative. I'm the recent former chair and still sit on the steering committee. I know that Ecology Action, Save Our Shores, and a number of other groups that are on this call are that organization that facilitates regional collaboration. And we often discuss wildfire and share best practices around wildfire. And I think when many of us that work in this sustainability, climate action space and energy space think about the future of renewables, this is exactly what we envision, is distributed renewables that give people resiliency, energy independence, cost savings, all the while decommissioning large fossil fuel power plants. And this kind of arrangement or rearrangement really could enable more points to shut down the grid and the distribution network, so that we're not having to shut the grid down all the way up at the transmission level. So that gives us much more control. It also could enable opportunities to bolster the green economy. You think about the trading and selling feature that was demonstrated by SoulSmart in Bangladesh. That there's a real possibility there, all the while influencing behavior. If pricing is higher during the day, the peak, then maybe people will choose to use energy at a different time of the day. So the other thing I would like to say about that is that Mayor already mentioned that we have just passed a natural gas prohibition. So all new buildings, all new construction in Santa Cruz must be all electric. And this transition that's happening throughout California will really help us to avoid some of those safety issues related to wildfires. For example, in the San Bruno, or I'm sorry, the San Ramon I think I'm getting that wrong, but the fire that took down San Ramon. And also electricity, by the way, is able to be brought online much quicker than natural gas. So there are a few things, but yes, the distributed solar, I think many of us feel like that is the future. And, you know, they pointed out in the film that there are unfortunately political realities that sometimes prevent that. And however, I'm confident that we can overcome that with the momentum we have here in California, which of course, as California goes, as the US goes, and sometimes as the world goes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wise-Weston. I do see that you need to jump off, but do you have a minute to share with us what your dream is for 2040?
My dream for 2040 is a completely decarbonized society, a carbon-free society, a just society, an inclusive society where all voices are heard and brought in from the very beginning. And again, I'll just point to that visioning. The 2040 has really given me fuel for visioning that is really powerful and, again, hopeful. And so I guess I'll close with that. Thank you so much. It's been.
Thank you, Tiffany. Before you have to get off, I just want to thank you personally, Catherine.
Oh, you are so welcome, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Much, Tiffany. Have a good evening, and thank you so much for being here with us. And I had one more question for Dr. Mendez, but since we are running short on time, I'm hoping if you do have any thoughts on it, Dr. Mendez, the big Southern California Edison solar grid project that is solar, but not quite in line with that, if you could just tie that into your dream for 2040, if you have any thoughts on that.
My dream for 24 is more just society, both in terms of racial, gender, sexuality issues, particularly in the environmental field. I think is my hope in terms of the energy solutions is having more distributed community level renewable energy projects. If that's through choice aggregation projects that I think was mentioned earlier that San Francisco and Contra Costa County have been doing to have more empowerment, community empowerment of deciding where local energy sources should go, and also is advancing technologies around storage. So when we do have these renewable energy, we're able to store some of the renewable energy that we are able to generate locally, and making sure that these projects are available to low-income communities, apartment dwellers, as well as homeowners. And that goes with the electrification of our vehicles as well.
Perfect, thank you. And are you up on this Southern Edison project? Is that something you've been following? Or it was something they list on the film's website, and it just seems to run a little bit counter to what we were just talking about with the
I'm not too briefly aware of it.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Dr. Mendez. Mayor Cummings, would you like to share with us what's your dream for 2040?
Yeah, I'd just like to say similarly that, I hope that we can become a carbon-free society by that point. It's going to be a difficult road to go down, but I think that there's the will of the people. And I really hope that by 2040, we start seeing reductions in our atmospheric carbon concentrations so that we can start rolling back these impacts of climate change. I'm really hoping that we can have an economically balanced community, and we see economically balanced communities throughout our entire country. It's a shame that we have to see certain areas where low-income people have to live further out and have to commute in. And by creating economically balanced communities, we can hopefully reduce the amount of time people have to commute and the distances they have to commute, so that they're not stuck in their cars for a large portion of their days, and so that they're not, hopefully by then we'll have carbon-free vehicles. But if we still do see carbon emitting vehicles at that point in time, this will also help to reduce carbon emissions. I'm really hoping that we see racially diverse communities, and we see racial justice at the forefront of everything that we're doing, and that we have pathways for socioeconomic upward mobility for communities of color, so that they can be involved in all the decision-making processes that are happening, and that we're all being treated equally. So thank you for having me, and I appreciate being invited to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Mayor Cummings. Mayor Garcia, would you like to share with us your dream for 2040?
Well, in 2040, I'm going to be 93 years old. So part of my dream is that I will be alive in 2040. And if I am alive, I dream of humans connecting back to nature. When I was a child of about 4 or 5 years old, my sister and I lived in a ranch in Moss Landing with my grandparents. And of course, my grandparents and my mother couldn't afford to buy us toys. So she and I would love to go outside, and we played with ladybugs, caterpillars, worms, and mud. Oh, we used to love to make mud. And so in 2040, I dream that we have an environment so all of us can enjoy and take advantage of nature and live the most healthy life that life can be lived. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Garcia. Yes, some of my favorite memories as a mother were watching my children literally covered in mud. So I think actually that time in nature is so important. And, oh, perfect timing. Council Member Estrada lost his internet briefly, but has just made it back. Council Member Estrada, would you like to share with us your dream for 2040?
I'd love to. It's funny that I know this question was coming, but I really hadn't taken the time to really think about what I wanted for Watsonville. But
Well, maybe you'll have a 20-year-old daughter, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I guess I just of leaders to have what they need to tackle and to like I said, this is an underdog story for humanity, and I know they're the ones who are gonna get us out of it. They're our saviors. They're the ones we're waiting for. But I think right now, we have to kind of build, give them everything they need to make sure that they can just help us build a better world. And so, that definitely includes, as Nancy likes to say, bold action. And if we have bold action, I know we'll have a Highway 1 where you can get to Santa Cruz, hopefully as fast as possible in a safe way. We'll have green jobs here in Watsonville. We are ag leaders, and I see us being, just smarter, more energy efficient, ag community sector where people will have access to healthy foods. They will have what they need to grow up, and really we will have done a lot of the heavy lifting to make sure that barriers continue to come down, that are built by racism, that are built by exploitation, that are built by ignorance. And I know that we'll help them pave that road that they themselves will lead us on. So that's my vision for the next 20 years, and hopefully we'll get there.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Estrada. I'd like to next invite Alexi to share your dream for 2040.
Thank you, Gail. Well, I think that my dream for 2040 is that we all heal from historic trauma. I believe that colonization and systemic racism continues to tear our communities apart and affects us through that intergenerational trauma that passes down generation after generation. It's also important to build our relationships with our non-human relatives. We as people need to have humility and recognize that we are not at the center of this world. We cannot pretend to know how to manage our Earth's resources without recognizing the need for reciprocal relationships with our environment. From there, we can address solutions that are good for all communities, both human and non-human. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexi. I would like to next invite Ms. Harkins, Tammy, to come on and share her dream for 2040. And I did see that Luke thanked us for being here and did need to sign off. But Itzel, if you are interested in sharing your dream for 2040 after Ms. Harkins, we would love to hear from you too. So Ms. Harkins?
I should probably let Itzel go first because that's what my dream is, putting youth first, as Alexi said, the 7th generation thinking about the future. That's what sustainability is. But my dream is every student graduates, whether it's college or 8th grade or high school, but possibly by college, eco-literate, culturally literate, climate literate, justice literate. They really understand these things. So we don't have the idiots out there trying to make debates out of it or confusion out of it. That every kid gets the tools. And then when they come out, because the center of that film for me was those youth voices. Every time I saw those kids come on, whether it was Rocket Boots or Clean Oceans or whatever it was, we need to listen to their voices. And I mean really listen with heart and with sincerity and gravitas. And that's my dream, that every kid comes out doing this stuff and being literate in all these things. You tell.
Thank you, Ms. Harkins.
Si me voy a mi sueño de cómo me gustaría que fuera, tengo muchas metas, tengo muchos sueños, aunque sea algo grande, espero y se cumplan y sea, si viene al tema de cambio climático, mi principal sueño y meta es hacer una ciudad más verde en todo y que sea más escuchado este tema y que las personas lo entiendan más y no sea como de que algo que lo dejen solo pasar o que no le tomen importancia, pero sea un tema importante y que en verdad se esté haciendo un cambio y se esté haciendo algo para arreglar este problema. Eso sería todo.
Thank you, Itzal. So I know that my dream for 2040 personally is a world where no one is hungry and no one is breathing dirty air and drinking dirty water and nobody is, you know, seeing plastic wash up on their beaches and nobody is dying of cancer because they're too close to where that plastic is being produced or where that oil is being produced, because we won't be doing the things that are harming our planet anymore. And I hope that we will all be much happier, thriving, and healthier than we are today. So I know that Catherine would like to come on and share her dream for 2040 and and I know that she would like to thank all of our wonderful guests for being here today. Catherine?
Yeah, thank you, Gail. First, I want to say thank you to all of our wonderful panelists in case they have to jump off. I am blown away by the conversation. I think it has been beautiful and tremendous, and you know, the thoughts across the diversity of people involved. I loved hearing from the kids, and Save Our Shores is so excited to have been able to bring this to you. And I would just like to dream for 2040. And my dream is that we've managed to reverse this notion that humans have dominion over nature, and that we've returned to the traditions and the culture of our indigenous people who did believe that they were the stewards of nature and that they were there to protect nature and live in harmony and unity with nature. So that's my dream for 2040. And again, thank you so much for all the wonderful thoughts.
Catherine, I think we may have lost you. Her Wi-Fi made it with us this far, but it looks like it might have finally kicked out. I would like to just invite one last person to come on and share her dream for 2040, and that's Nancy Falstaff from Generacion, who is working so hard in Watsonville and really working with the farm working community down there, who is already being impacted by our climate and really trying to do so much for the community to help them prepare for what is coming in the best way possible. Nancy, would you like to share your dream?
Thank you, Gail. That's a surprise. It's wonderful to have heard this panel and be part of the discussion here. And I guess I have to say my dream for 2040 starts today. I would love to see every person here take to heart that what we need to do to protect a livable world is enormous, but it's doable. And we need many, many people to throw yourselves fully at this problem together with other millions of people around the world. I think we can do it, but we can't sort of be just thinking that, okay, by 2040 we'll do this. It really means changing our lives today, tomorrow, and helping all the people around us understand that as well, so that in 2040 we have a world with lessening carbon, and we have a world in which people have enough, and we're no longer allowing small numbers of people to have way more than everybody else. That's income inequality is one of the roots of this problem. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much for joining us here. So in closing, again, Mayor Cummings, Mayor Garcia, Dr. Mendez, Councilmember Estrada, Ms. Harkins, Alexi, and also Dr. Wise West, we so appreciate your all being with us here tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for all the work that you are doing to create this beautiful vision for our future. We have Councilmember Estrada's new little person. We've got to save the world for them. And I'm super grateful to Luke and Itzel for being here tonight for all the work that they're doing. And I know that we can't leave it all on your shoulders. There isn't time. So every one of us here tonight is going to do all that we can to protect your future, to protect my children's future, to protect Councilmember Estrada's future, and really the children everywhere. And we need to create a better world for everyone. So thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Hey all, I'm back. So if you didn't get my thank you so much. And did you hear my dream? Did you guys hear my dream?
I did hear your dream. I think we made it through the dream before we lost you.
All right. Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful to have you with us and share your incredible thoughts. And thank you so much for all the hard work that you all do. Our community leaders, our teachers, our Indigenous community, our authors, all of you. Thank you so very, very much.
I really believe that together we can build a beautiful 2025, 2030, 2035, 2040. We can do it. So thank you all.